The great mask debate did a backflip today. Suddenly, the top health officials are recommending them. Wait, weren't we told months and months ago that these things don't do anything to stop the spread of COVID-19 unless they're the special N95 variety? Well, apparently not anymore. Canadian health officials, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Theresa Tam, are now recommending all Canadians wear non-medical masks when physical distancing isn't possible. But it's only a recommendation. If it really works, why won't the government mandate non-medical masks for everyone? And will the government's big business loan program keep Canada's largest employers afloat? Who gets the money? And what are the strings attached? Let's find out. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Finance Minister, Nova Scotia MP Sean Fraser, joins us. Sir, I hope you and the family are well. Good to have you on the program. Let me just start with these masks. I've got one in my hand. Can you tell me, shed some light on why suddenly the non-medical masks are suddenly recommended after Canadians were told for months and months, you know what, you don't need them, they don't do anything. What changed?
Certainly, and I appreciate the invitation to join you on the show again. So we've been following public health advice to educate Canadians and ensure that the measures that were in place are going to serve their interests. What Dr. Tam, the Chief Medical Officer for the Public Health Agency of Canada, has suggested is that Canadians now should wear a mask if they're going into public where social distancing cannot be practiced. Previously, her advice was that Canadians may. I personally, when I visited the hospital recently, for example, to deliver surgical masks, I chose to wear a mask in public. But this afternoon, when I went for a walk in a local park with my daughter, not near anyone, I chose not to. Realistically, it's an additional layer of protection Canadians can choose to use when they're in a situation where physical distancing may not be possible.
But let's be clear, the advice has changed and people are confused. If the advice you're getting from the medical officer keeps changing, you know, look, other countries like South Korea months and months ago had people wearing these masks. Every province is now in the midst of phase one of reopening. If now suddenly we're on May 20th, we're getting new details, does this make your government question the advice that you're getting if it keeps flip-flopping?
Not really, and I would actually characterize it in quite a different way. You know, it's interesting on the economic response. When we've had to iterate and make changes to policies, Canadians have really said, wow, as the circumstances change, so has the government's approach to tackle problems. As we see the circumstances change and economies reopen, and you're going to see people increasingly spending time in closer proximity to one another than they were over the past few months, it makes sense to take advantage of that additional layer of protection that a mask can provide. So with great respect, I don't view this to be some sort of flip-flop that discredits the previous advice. I view it to be the best advice available on the social and public health conditions that are facing Canadians today.
All right. Well, let me just ask you, you're a lawyer. So you agree then that the Chief Public Health Officer now says masks like this do work to stop the spread. They don't protect me, but they would protect you from me if I'm an asymptomatic spreader. Do you agree with that?
My understanding is it could have some mitigating effect if you're in a situation where you are, for example, can't be more than 2 meters apart. If you're in a social situation where physical distancing is possible, that is also an important measure. And there's a whole host of layers of protection. Remember, at its core, the best thing you can do is to practice physical distancing, wash your hands, stay home where possible. And yes, when you're in a more crowded environment and can't practice physical distancing, having that additional layer could potentially help mitigate the spread of the illness.
Mr. Fraser, though, if the government's chief role is, one, to protect Canadians' health, and this has a role to play in that, according to the Chief Public Health Officer, your second one is to make sure the quality of life and the economy is on track. If this is a way to get us back to work, people in grocery stores, people getting back to work, as everyone's trying to do, this provides some kind of that helps that and might protect health. Why doesn't your government make this mandatory? I'm just trying to figure out why the half step, why recommend it? Just make them mandatory when you're inside any crowded place, public transit, a grocery store. Why not just make it mandatory if it helps?
So there's a pretty clear answer. For the most part, the public health measures that have been introduced to protect the health of Canadians have been taken by provincial governments quite properly, who are responsible for the administration of, healthcare in their respective provinces. We can make recommendations on best practices, and we have been doing that. But I also don't want to give Canadians a sense of false confidence that by wearing a mask, they'll somehow become invincible. The last thing we want to do is have everyone show up with an amateur mask at Sobeys or the Superstore and start showing up by the hundreds. We have to take things in a safe manner as we go forward. And this recommendation, I believe, will help protect Canadians who find themselves in a position where they really can't follow the other public health advice, which is to continue practice physical distancing, wash your hands, and so on.
Right. I mean, I'm into washing the hands, but it does candidly seem a little wishy-washy to wear them or not to wear them. Let me just turn to the Large Employer Emergency Financing Facility, better known as the LEAF program. It will provide minimum loans of $60 million or higher to large employers that have a minimum of $300 million of annual revenue. And they also have to have a significant impact on Canada's economy based on their workforce. How will you determine which companies will be eligible for this?
Well, we're not announcing today that there's certain companies that are in or out. Of course, it'll be up to companies to actually apply for this kind of financing. The kinds of things that we're going to be looking for are the businesses that are of strategic importance to the economy, those that many Canadians rely on and can't have access to some of the other emergency measures that will help them stay afloat through this unprecedented crisis. This program is designed to help those larger employers that many Canadians rely on for employment to get through a difficult period, while at the same time putting protections in place for taxpayers to ensure that every Canadian who's paying into this fund is helping their neighbors preserve their job, and at the same time has some comfort on the back end that there won't be companies who abscond with this kind of funding.
Okay, this is a loan. I know it's not aid. It's subjected to interest. They got to pay it back in 5 years, and there's warrants, so people understand. It's like buying a stock at a set price, so people can, if they don't pay back, there's an ownership. But let me just get to the strings attached. If a company uses tax havens, are they eligible for the money?
So there's an important distinction on this particular issue. If you've been convicted of tax evasion, then you are not eligible for this money. If you undertake to use tax practices that are in accordance with Canadian law, that won't disqualify you in and of itself from the program. One of the things that I think is really, really important.
Why not? Sorry, I just got to stop. Why not? Your government has said you want to get rid of tax havens. I know they're legal, but your government is openly against tax havens. They don't like them. Why not say you want to apply? It's a way to get the companies who are using shell companies and tax havens to start paying. They're asking for taxpayers' money. Why should they be trying to use whatever loophole there is for a tax haven? Why not just close that loophole?
Because the motivation for this program is to ensure that Canadians can keep their jobs. I don't want to discriminate against a Canadian based on who they work for. Their job is important to their family and their community, and they deserve the same protection that their neighbor gets who may work for another company. You're absolutely right. There are tax avoidance measures that we should be tackling and will be tackling as we go forward. But I don't want to use that as an excuse to deny the kinds of protections we're offering to some Canadians that ends up costing others their job.
But to be candid, your government is using this for social engineering in a certain way. For example, if you're a business looking for a LEAF loan, you have to commit to climate and sustainability goals. So on one hand, you're saying you have to do a climate report if you want this. And so because that's part of our climate strategy. So you haven't separated that from the LEAF goals, but you're separating closing loopholes. Why do one political goal but not another? I'm just trying to figure that out.
Sure. When you're looking at it's actually interesting. Climate disclosure is a sort of growing aspect of larger companies that have gone public and are seeking funding. One of the things that
I think we might have lost you, Mr. Fraser. Hang on, which is an important answer. I'm just going to wait till
the risks that
maybe
may
he'll
come
unfreeze.
with the operation of that line of business. I don't view that to be the same thing as saying because someone may have done business in a certain other country to minimize their tax burden in accordance with the rules.
Sean Fraser, hang on. We've got, okay, so guys, hang on. We've lost the audio feed, and this is what happens This is what happens when you're doing home broadcasting. Oh, we've got him back there. Sean Fraser, I just got a minute. We did lose your last question, just real quick. We only had your audio. We lost your video there for a minute. Go ahead. Just give us the answer again for that, if you don't mind.
Certainly. So when it comes to climate disclosure requirements, this is a growing practice for companies that have gone public, and it's designed to ensure that there's a free flow of information. It's not the same thing as saying companies who do X cannot access the program. That obligation is tied to the free flow of information so that investors will actually know about the climate risks that they're taking on when they put money towards a company. The issue that you've raised, if we were actually to say in an impromptu way that certain practices are now unsavory rather than illegal, there's a huge amount of uncertainty that will cause businesses not to qualify, that will cost Canadians their jobs. The correct approach, in my mind, is to exclude companies who've been convicted of tax evasion and then work to close those loopholes for tax avoidance as well that may be within the rules, but Canadians don't believe to be just.
All right. Well, there's lots of questions about, bonuses for executives and others, who qualifies. But unfortunately, I got to leave it there just for time purposes. Mr. Fraser, always good to have you on the program, sir. Thanks so much.
I'm happy to come back and chat about those additional protections for taxpayers anytime.